On the shadowy slopes of Black Mountain, where coal dust and sorrow once hung heavy in the air, there's a ghostly figure folks ain't been able to forget. They call her Headless Annie, a tragic soul born out of pure injustice, her tale colder than an Appalachian wind cutting through the holler. Is she a restless spirit, caught up in the mountain's dark past, or just a warning for what happens when greed runs wild? Step a little closer if you dare and see for yourself what the truth might be. Welcome to Kentucky Melody, where we shine a light on the beauty, history, and mysteries of the bluegrass. If eerie tales and hair-raising legends are what tickles your fancy, well, y'all have come to the right place. Our Scary Stories from Kentucky podcast playlist takes a deep dive into the folklore and hauntings that make these hills and hollers unforgettable. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to keep journeying with us into the darker corners of Appalachian history. Now, let's see what secrets are hiding out yonder in them shadows. Black Mountain, stretching up to a skyscraping 4,145 feet, ain't just Kentucky's highest point. It's a sentinel of the Appalachian soul, watching over Harlan County and brushing up against the Virginia line. Folks round here don't just see it as a pile of rock and trees. No, sir, this mountain's a living, breathing thing, steeped in the kind of history that sticks to you like coal dust. It's a symbol of the rugged, untamed beauty of Appalachia, a place where nature and hardship are tangled together like the roots of its ancient oaks. Black Mountain's story ain't one that can be told without talking about coal. Black gold, as they called it. Back in the late 1800s and early 1900s, the mountain's belly was rich with it, and Harlan County became a boom town built on its back. Beneath its dense forests and mossy trails, men with carbide lamps on their helmets would disappear into the dark, digging deep to pull out the wealth that'd keep America's factories running and trains rolling. But let me tell you, that coal didn't come cheap. The 1930s were rougher in a cob in Harlan County, a time when hard times hit even harder in these hollers. The Great Depression came crashing down like a thunderstorm, making bad times worse for folks already struggling to scrape by. Coal miners worked long, back-breaking hours deep in the earth, digging out the black gold that kept the lights on across the country. But down in them shafts, danger lurked in every shadow. Cave-ins, gas explosions, and the slow, cruel chokehold of black lung disease. And what did they have to show for it? Pay in company scrip, a kind of funny money you couldn't spend nowhere but the company store, where prices were higher than a hawk flying over Black Mountain. It was a trap, plain and simple, keeping folks chained to a life they couldn't afford to leave. The miners' homes weren't much better. They lived in company-owned shacks, most of them little wooden boxes that couldn't keep out the cold or the damp. Winters bit hard in them hills, and the wind seemed to find every crack in the walls. Inside, the women kept the home fires burning, tending to the young'uns and doing what they could to stretch a meal. Many had a garden out back, maybe a pig or some chickens, just to keep their families fed when the company store didn't offer enough. The children pitched in, too, working the land, fetching water, and, more often than not, leaving school early to help their folks make ends meet. Education was a luxury most couldn't afford, not when there were mouths to feed. Still, the folks who lived in them hollers were tighter than bark on a tree. Neighbors leaned on each other, sharing what little they had when times got tough. They gathered for church meetings, barn raisins, and Sunday dinners, trying to keep some light in their lives even as the coal dust dimmed their days. But there was always a shadow hanging over 'em. The coal companies. Those who dared speak out or organize for better pay and safer working conditions faced more than just job loss. The companies had their own enforcers, men with guns and bad tempers who weren't shy about using violence to keep folks in line. It made for a life full of tension and mistrust, where even speaking your mind could bring trouble to your door. Into this world was born Annie, a coal miner's daughter with a heart as strong as the mountain she called home. She lived with her family in a small, weather-worn house clinging to the slopes of Black Mountain. Her daddy was one of the brave ones, a man who wouldn't stay quiet when he saw his fellow miners treated like mules. He spoke up for their rights, joining the labor movement that was spreading through the hills like wildfire. But that kind of courage came with a price. The company men had their eyes on him, and the family's life hung by a thread, always teetering on the edge of violence as the labor disputes turned into outright war. Annie grew up watching her daddy fight for something better, and it shaped her spirit. She saw the worry etched on her mama's face, the strain of holding the family together when the world seemed set on breaking them apart. But she also saw the strength of her people, the way they held on to hope, the way they fought not just for themselves, but for each other. That fire in her family's soul burned bright in Annie, setting the stage for her own part in the mountain story, one that'd echo long after she was gone. Annie's father was one of them rare men who wasn't afraid to stand tall against the coal company, no matter the cost. He had a fire in his belly, the kind that wouldn't let him sit quiet while his friends and neighbors were worked to death for scraps. As an organizer for the United Mine Workers of America, UMWA, he became the voice of the miners, rallying them to fight for fair wages, safer working conditions, and the right to unionize. But speaking up in them days was like lighting a stick of dynamite. The coal company didn't take kindly to anyone threatening their grip on power. To them, unions weren't just a nuisance, they were a full-blown rebellion. It wasn't long before Annie's daddy caught the company's attention, and not in a good way. The coal barons sent their hired thugs, hard men with hearts as cold as the mountain in winter, to deal with him. These enforcers were known for their brutality, leaving behind a trail of bruises, broken bones, and worse. They didn't just want to scare folks. They wanted to break the spirit of anyone who dared rise up against them. One fateful night, under the cover of darkness, the enforcers came calling. The family's little wooden house perched on the slopes of Black Mountain didn't stand a chance against their boots and battering. They busted down the door like a thunderclap, their faces shadowed by the dim light of the lanterns they carried. Annie's daddy met him at the threshold trying to shield his family with nothing but his own determination. But the enforcers weren't looking to talk. They dragged him out into the cold night, their laughter as cruel as the winter wind. Inside, Annie and her mama weren't about to stand by. They fought back with every ounce of strength they had. Shouts, fists, anything they could muster. But the enforcers, mean as rattlesnakes, turned their fury on them too. In the chaos, tragedy struck. Some say Annie's head was severed deliberately, a sick message from the enforcers to the rest of the miners. Others believe it was an accident, the result of unchecked violence spiraling out of control. Either way, the end was the same. Annie's young life was snuffed out, her head lost to the violence of that terrible night. Her daddy didn't fare any better. The enforcers made sure he wouldn't speak another word, executing him in cold blood right there in the yard. When they were done, they torched the house, watching as flames licked up the walls and reduced everything the family had built to ash and smoke. Annie's mama was left alive, though many reckon that was the cruelest blow of all. She was forced to carry the burden of what she'd seen, to tell the tale of her family's destruction at the hands of men who valued profits over people. The story of that night spread like wildfire through the hills, leaving a mark on everyone who heard it. Annie's death wasn't just a tragedy. It became a symbol, a haunting reminder of the cost of standing up against injustice in a world where power cared little for the lives it crushed. And some say her spirit never left that mountain, wandering the trails where her family's home once stood, searching for the peace stolen from her on that dark and terrible night. The murder of Annie and her daddy hit the community like a hammer on an anvil, leaving shock and sorrow in its wake. Folks were outraged, no doubt about it, but fear has a way of silencing even the loudest voices. The coal company, sitting high and mighty, denied they had anything to do with it, calling the rumors just wild talk from nervous miners. But folks knew better. The enforcers weren't exactly subtle, and the timing was too perfect. Still, nobody dared step forward. The company's grip on Harlan County was tighter than a noose, and the threat of retaliation hung heavy in the air. No one was ever brought to justice for what happened that night, and the law turned a blind eye like it always did when the coal barons were involved. As the years rolled on, Annie's story became more than just a memory. It turned into a warning, a grim reminder of what could happen when you stood up against power too big to fight. Parents would tell their kids to mind their words, to think twice before speaking out. Miners would glance over their shoulders, wondering if the same fate could come knocking on their doors. Annie's death wasn't just a tragedy. It became a shadow that stretched across the hollers, leaving folks cautious and scared. But the land don't forget, not here in these hills. Stories started to creep up, whispered in low tones round the fires or in quiet corners of the churchyard. Folks who wandered near where Annie's house once stood claimed they felt something. A chill in the air even on the hottest summer day, or the sound of footsteps following them where there shouldn't be none. Some said they heard faint cries carrying on the wind, while others swore they'd seen a shadowy figure drifting through the trees, headless and searching. The legend of Headless Annie was born from those whispers, growing bigger with each telling. They said she roamed the slopes of Black Mountain, her tattered dress fluttering like a ghostly flag in the moonlight. Her spirit, folks reckoned, was restless, bound to the place where she and her daddy met such a violent end. Some believe she's looking for justice that never came, while others say she's just trying to find peace. Whatever the truth, her story became part of the mountain itself, woven into the very roots of the trees and the stones beneath them. Annie's tale ain't just a ghost story. It's a reminder of the struggle and sacrifice that shaped these hills. Her spirit may haunt the mountain, but her memory lives on in the hearts of those who remember the price paid by those who dared to stand up against the giants of their time. They say the ghost of Headless Annie still roams the slopes of Black Mountain, drifting through its dense forests and crooked roads like a shadow that just won't fade. Folks who've seen her tell the same tale. She's a spectral figure, her tattered nightgown fluttering like it's caught in an unseen breeze. Sometimes she's headless, her neck nothing but a dark, empty void. Other times she's cradling her severed head in her arms, her eyes fixed on some far-off place like she's searching for something she'll never find. Most sightings happen near the old mining roads, those rough and winding paths that snake through the mountain like veins in its rocky skin. She's known to appear suddenly right in the middle of the road, her ghostly form lit up by the headlights like a bad memory come to life. Some say she lingers in rearview mirrors, her pale face or empty shoulders staring back at drivers just long enough to chill 'em to the bone. Drivers who cross her path report strange things happening to their cars. Engines will sputter and die for no reason, like the mountain itself is trying to hold 'em there. Headlights flicker like candles in the wind, plunging the road into darkness just long enough to make the hairs on your neck stand up. And then there's the feeling, a weight in the air, an unnatural cold that seeps into your skin no matter how warm the night might be. Some folks describe it as an overwhelming sense of dread, like something's watching them from the shadows, waiting just beyond the edges of the light. It ain't just the sight of her that gets folks talking. Many claim to hear faint sobbing, carrying through the woods on the night air. Others say they've heard whispers, soft but clear, calling their names as if Annie herself is reaching out to 'em. The sound ain't like no wind or animal. They say it's human, and it sends shivers down their spine. There've been those who've felt the air turn icy, the kind of cold that bites right through you, even in the heat of summer. One foggy night, a trucker was making his way through the winding roads of Black Mountain. The mist was thick as stew, and his headlights barely cut through it when a shape appeared in the middle of the road. At first, he thought it was a person, maybe someone who'd lost their way. But as he got closer, his heart nearly stopped. It wasn't just a person, it was a woman, dressed in a tattered gown, and she was holding her own severed head in her arms. The trucker swerved, nearly jackknifing his rig to avoid her, but by the time he looked back, she was gone. All that was left was the eerie silence of the mountain, and a memory that'd stay with him forever. A group of hikers decided to pitch their tent near the base of Black Mountain, eager to explore its trails and soak in its rugged beauty. But as night fell, their excitement turned to unease. It started with faint whispers, so soft they thought it was the wind, until they realized the voices were coming from all around the tent. Then came the sound of footsteps crunching on dry leaves, slow and deliberate, circling them like a predator stalking its prey. One of the campers mustered the courage to peek outside and swore he saw a pale figure standing just inside the tree line, watching them with eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. By morning, the hikers packed up and left, leaving the mountain behind but carrying their fear with them. Not everyone steers clear of Black Mountain's haunted reputation. One local paranormal investigator, armed with a recorder and plenty of nerve, set out to capture evidence of the supernatural near the site where Annie is said to haunt. Late one night, as he walked the overgrown path to the ruins of an old homestead, he felt a sudden chill that made the hairs on his neck stand up. Undeterred, he started asking questions, hoping to stir up a response from the spirits. Later, as he reviewed the audio, he heard something that stopped him cold, a faint, childlike voice whispering, "Help me." The voice was clear enough to send shivers down his spine, and he hasn't set foot on the mountain since. Each of these sightings adds another layer to the eerie tapestry of Black Mountain. Whether it's ghostly figures, disembodied voices, or the feeling of being watched, one thing's for sure: this mountain holds secrets that refuse to stay buried. The tale of Headless Annie ain't just a ghost story whispered to spook folks on dark nights. It's a testament to the pain and grit of a community forged in the fires of hardship and injustice. Black Mountain, with its shadowy forests and haunted roads, stands not just as the setting for this tale but as a keeper of countless other stories, etched deep into its rugged terrain. each whisper of the wind and crackle of leaves feels like the mountain itself remembers the sorrows and struggles of those who lived and died within its embrace. Annie's story, whether seen as a spectral truth or a legend born from grief, endures as a stark reminder of the sacrifices made by coal miners and their families. It speaks to the weight of oppression, the bravery of resistance, and the devastating cost that often followed. Her restless spirit, if it indeed roams the mountain, seems to echo the voices of countless others who face the same struggles but whose stories may never be told. Even today, her tale stirs something deep in those who hear it: fear, fascination, and a quiet reflection on the darker chapters of Appalachian history. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, one thing's certain: the story of Headless Annie, like Big Black Mountain itself, is too big and too haunting to ever truly fade away. It lingers in the hills, the forests, and the hearts of those who dared to remember. Well, now, we done told the tale of Headless Annie, but now it's your turn to speak up. Folks been whispering about her for generations, but everybody's got their own take on the story. Do y'all reckon it's just one of them old spooky yarns folks like to spin, or could there be a lick of truth to it? Now, picture this. You're out late, all by your lonesome, and you see her shadowy figure rising out of the dark. What did y'all do? Would you stand there like a deer in headlights, hightail it out of there, or maybe even try to talk to her? And while we're at it, what kind of ghost stories y'all got from where you're from? Ever had something happen that made the hairs on the back of your neck stand up? Don't be shy now. Share your thoughts and stories down in the comments. We'd love to hear 'em. If Annie's tale gave you the heebie-jeebies, be sure to like, share, and subscribe to Kentucky Melody. Y'all's support helps keep these haunting tales going strong. Thanks for watching. And don't be a stranger. Come on back real soon. Just be careful if you hear footsteps behind you, especially if they ain't got a head to go with them.